Despite the sanctions imposed by the European Union on Russia, EU countries continue to indirectly import Russian oil through intermediaries. This practice has been criticized as an empty scare strategy by the EU. This process occurs through a loophole that allows countries like China, India, Turkey, the UAE, and Singapore to buy Russian crude oil, refine it into various petroleum products, and then sell these products to the EU and other Western countries. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, has identified these 5 countries as the main intermediaries in this scheme. Since the sanctions only apply to crude oil and not refined products, Russian oil can legally enter the EU market in this roundabout way. Thanks to this loophole, the EU remains one of the largest importers of Russian origin oil products, thus undermining the intended impact of sanctions on Russia's oil revenues. In 2023, it is estimated that the EU indirectly imported about 35 million barrels of Russian oil through intermediaries, generating significant tax revenues for the Kremlin. These indirect imports of Russian oil demonstrate the difficulties in fully complying with sanctions and ending financial support to Russia for its military activities. Although the EU does not impose direct sanctions on indirect Russian oil imports, it has been criticized for failing to effectively close these loopholes. Some analysts argue that the EU is aware of these indirect supplies, but seeks to balance the sanctions regime with practical energy needs and economic stability. The EU's dependence on energy imports forces it to balance sanctions with the need to ensure stable and affordable energy supplies for its member states. Such a strategy helps the EU avoid the serious economic disruptions and energy crisis that would result from a complete withdrawal from Russian energy. Let us consider the scope of EU sanctions in more detail. After the embargo was imposed, offshore shipments of Russian crude oil fell by 35%. However, these shipments subsequently recovered as Russia reoriented its oil to non-sanctioned countries such as China and India. The share of Russian oil in total EU oil imports fell sharply from 30% in the first quarter of 2022 to just 3% in the first quarter of 2024. This decline was offset by increased imports from countries such as the US, Norway, and Saudi Arabia. In January 2024, the total value of EU fossil fuel imports from Russia amounted to 0.8 billion euros for pipeline gas, 0.7 billion euros for LNG, 0.6 billion euros for crude oil, and 0.09 billion euros for oil products. Despite the sanctions, Russia managed to maintain oil export volumes by reorienting supplies to Asian markets. Russian crude oil and oil products were sold at significant discounts, with the benchmark Urals grade at times trading below $40 per barrel compared to the ceiling price of $60 per barrel. Continued imports of refined products into the EU, albeit indirectly through countries like India and Turkey, provided Russia with significant revenues, undermining the full impact of the sanctions. The EU's 13th sanctions package, adopted in February 2024, expanded the restrictions to include more individuals and organizations linked to the Russian military-industrial complex. This package was aimed at further limiting Russia's access to military technology and closing loopholes in existing sanctions. Overall, although EU sanctions have changed the direction of Russian oil exports, the existence of loopholes and indirect trade routes has allowed Russian oil to still reach EU markets, providing Russia with some oil revenues. BRICS support for Russia plays a key role in helping it circumvent EU sanctions, thereby mitigating their impact on the Russian economy. This support manifests itself on several fronts. China and India have become key markets for Russian exports, especially in the energy sector. China has significantly increased its imports of Russian oil, gas, and coal, accounting for about 53% of Russia's crude oil exports in 2024. India has similarly increased its imports of Russian crude oil, refining it domestically and often exporting refined products to other regions, including the EU. In addition to the BRICS, Turkey has become a major importer of Russian refined petroleum products, especially after the EU and G7 ban on imports of refined petroleum products came into effect. In March 2024, Turkey's total imports of Russian petroleum products increased by 15%. BRICS countries are developing alternative financial systems to reduce reliance on Western networks, which are often a tool for sanctions. Initiatives like the BRICS payment system and increased use of national currencies in trade transactions allow Russia to circumvent restrictions imposed by SWIFT and other Western financial institutions. Russia has concluded several long-term trade agreements with the BRICS countries, ensuring a steady flow of goods and resources. These agreements cover energy supplies, agricultural products, and technological cooperation, providing Russia with stable economic relations outside of Western influence. Economic support from the BRICS countries helps Russia mitigate the downturn that could occur due to EU sanctions. By reorienting exports to the BRICS countries, Russia preserves its revenue streams. For example, although Russia's oil export revenues have declined from their peak, they remain substantial due to continued trade with China and India. China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, has invested significantly in infrastructure projects in Russia, strengthening connectivity and creating new trade routes. These investments are strengthening Russia's economic infrastructure and opening up new avenues for trade. The BRICS countries also provide Russia with political and diplomatic support on international platforms, countering Western narratives and sanctions. This collective stance helps Russia maintain a certain legitimacy and influence in world affairs. Thus, support from the BRICS is crucial for Russia to overcome the difficulties created by EU sanctions. By diversifying trade, developing alternative financial systems, entering into long-term agreements, and receiving political support, Russia can mitigate the negative effects of sanctions and maintain its economy and geopolitical position. This cooperation underscores the strategic importance of the BRICS in the global economic and political landscape. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support is very important to our growth. Also, leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments. We appreciate feedback from viewers. I wish you all the best and success in all your endeavors.